Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Amy Susan. I'm with Missouri Enterprise, the Show Me States manufacturing expert. We are the dedicated MEP Center, of course, here in Missouri. Before we get started, I just want to go over a quick housekeeping. Again, our organization, Missouri Enterprise, is funded by NIST. That's a division within the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the funding that they provide enables us to serve companies and manufacturers in the great state of Missouri in a variety of ways, whether it's industry certifications, technology implementation, workforce or professional development, which is what we're talking about today, continuous improvement, workplace safety, growth plans, and so much more. So I need to wind myself up to do that next time. What we need to do is show that we're helping companies like yours with thought-provoking information, webinars, training, and today would certainly be counted. So following the event, if you could just stick on for a couple, maybe a minute, we have a couple questions to ask you. It'll come via poll. So I'll go ahead and say launch poll, and you'll see the little poll come up and go ahead and just answer those questions. Followed by that, within 6 months or so, your dedicated area business manager, if you are in the state of Missouri, will reach out to you and ask you those same series of questions, and that will be the official survey that we will use to supply to our federal partners. With that, again, I'm going to soon turn it over to John, who is our guest speaker today. He's an IndustryWeek Contributing Editor and author of The Façade of Excellence, Defining a New Normal of Leadership. Today's webinar is collaborating with employees, improving culture and processes. Before John takes over, I'm going to quickly introduce April Schmidt. She's on our team at Missouri Enterprise, and she is an expert when it comes to helping organizations tackle their leadership and improve culture, which, as we all know, is underscores so many other issues and challenges that our manufacturing community faces. So with that, April, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today for such an important topic. And certainly a thank you to John for being with us today. If you have not had the opportunity to get John's book, The Façade of Excellence, Defining a New Normal of Leadership, I do highly suggest it. It's not your typical read, as it does combine storyline with practical knowledge and really helps to underscore the importance of building strong teams and how that can impact a culture and create that feeling of psychological safety, which we know is so critically and important, especially these days. One of the things that with John, he is, as Amy mentioned, a contributing editor to Industry Weekly, an author. John started his career with General Electric and then worked for Ingersoll Rand before starting his own consulting company. He has had the opportunity to study with leaders in the area of continuous improvement, such as Dr. W. Edwards Deming, Brian Joyner, and Stephen Covey. I would like to turn it over to John so that he can educate us on improving culture.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the invitation and for having me today. I know, people's time is very valuable, and I appreciate taking the time to attend this webinar. Hopefully, we'll cover a lot of topics that will be of interest to everyone. So let me go ahead and start by pulling up my screen. All right, so as was mentioned, the title of this is Collaborating with Employees, Improving Culture and Processes. April already went through my background. I will say that I've been writing for Industry Week for about 6 years, and they also have a best plants competition. So companies from all around North America supply information to this competition, and I've been a judge for that for the last 6 years as well. And what's been great about that is it allows me to look at tremendous amounts of data from those companies who claim to be world-class, to be achieving excellence. And it's interesting, the last couple of years especially, one of the patterns that I've noticed in that competition is those plants that tend to be doing the best in their metrics, in their performance, also have won the distinction of being a best place to work. So someone in their industry, maybe the government, did a survey of employees, and the winners won also a best place to work distinction. So that really tells you a lot about the culture of that particular location. And that's really what this is all about, is defining what a good culture for excellence is. If you're interested in reading my articles, at the bottom of the screen, you can see there is the web page at IndustryWeek. These slides are going to be made available, so you can reference that when you receive these slides. So like I mentioned, I've been writing for IndustryWeek for quite a while, and up on the screen are some of the topics and some of the titles of my articles. And it gives you a sense for, not a traditional approach to talking about Lean and Six Sigma. It's really more about culture. And I've been in this continuous improvement business for most of my 35-year career. And that's the one thing that I've learned over the years, is that leadership and culture plays a critical role in any improvement initiative. So as April mentioned, my book came out a few months ago. So if you want more information about the topics that we're discussing today, please feel free to reference the book. And as April mentioned, the book is written a little bit differently. There's a story that goes throughout the book. In fact, half of each chapter is related to the story. Every event that occurs in the story actually did occur sometime in my career. The reason I like to write in story format is to protect the identity of the people who are involved. The two main characters in the book, one is Frank Smith. He is an executive running a particular division within a particular company, and he does it all the wrong way. He tries to achieve excellence kind of the way managers did in the 1980s, 1990s, and even to today in some cases. He uses fear to try to drive motivation. He tries to manipulate data to make things look better than they really are. He tries to sweep problems under the rug, that sort of thing. So he's kind of the villain in the book, if you will. And then there's another character, Jim Brown. He's also an executive that works for the same company as Frank and heads up one of the divisions. And Jim is new to the company, and he wants to achieve excellence doing it the correct way. So he wants to get the employees involved, achieve collaboration, achieve teamwork, but he inherits a staff that is accustomed to working for a command and control type boss. And so they're very resistant to change. And he finally realizes he has to win them over first before he has any hope of winning over the rest of the employees. So that's a little bit about the book. About a year and a half ago, to get ready for a keynote speech that I was doing for Virginia Tech, and I actually talk about this in the book as well, I asked a simple question on social media. What is the main ingredient to sustaining and expanding an improvement initiative? I'd like for you to think about that for a moment. How would you answer that question if you had one word to describe the main ingredient to sustaining and expanding an improvement initiative? What would that word be? And I tell you, I'd like for you to just take a moment and type that word in the chat box, if you will. And we'll take a look at those. So, what word comes to mind when you think about the main ingredient to sustaining and expanding an improvement initiative? So let's see here. It looks like we've got things like trust, training, leadership, engagement. Looks like some really great words here. Consistency, commitment, people, culture, vision, ownership, communication. That's a great list of answers. Well, I ended up getting over 100,000 responses, which was pretty overwhelming. But I took all those responses when I did this and put it into a word cloud. The size of the word indicates how often that particular word came up in the responses. And let's see here. This is what was the result of that. So you can see by far the #1 response was leadership, but that was followed pretty closely by the word commitment. And I think these two words go hand in hand with each other. You know, how committed is the leadership? And that's more than just funding an improvement initiative or providing training for the employees. That's actually taking a hard look at what leadership really means and how is it different when you're trying to do Lean and Six Sigma. And how do the leaders need to grow and change their style in order to be successful? Now you can see some of the other words up here, you know, culture, buy-in, trust, people, vision, communication. A lot of words that you would relate to culture kinds of things, more of the softer side of Lean and Six Sigma. And I do think that's critically important for not only starting an improvement initiative, but sustaining it. Because a lot of times I get complaints from companies that say, yeah, we started Lean a few years ago and it lasted, you know, maybe 6 months and then it kind of started fading out. Well, that tells me that the leadership didn't change, the culture didn't change. Maybe a few tools were taught and introduced, and that was about it. So when you think about the 3 ingredients to sustaining improvement, you've got these 3 circles. Most people tend to be most comfortable in this orange circle of process. You know, teaching the tools, teaching the methodologies. And where I come from is I think these other 2 circles are critically important to any improvement initiative, the leadership side and the direction side. And those are the 2 circles we'll talk about today. As April mentioned in my introduction, I did have the opportunity to spend time with Dr. Ed Deming. As those of you that may not know that much about Dr. Deming, he actually is the foundation, really, of all of the things that we kind of take for granted today when we discuss Lean and Six Sigma. He's the one that went to Japan after World War II and taught the Japanese CEOs how to change their culture and introduce them to a whole new way of thinking about running an organization. He was very passionate about these things, and in fact, as you can see from this picture, it was taken in 1991. He led a 4-day training session, all pretty much on his own. There were about 750 participants in this training session, and it was being broadcast by satellite to 2 other locations. He did the entire 4 days pretty much on his own, and in this picture, he's 91. So can you imagine the passion and stamina that would be required to do that about these topics? Now, Dr. Deming wrote a book called Out of the Crisis, and in this book, he introduced his 14 points for running an organization. It was kind of interesting. When I first introduced these 14 points to a group of executives at General Electric in the early 1990s, they could only agree upon one of the 14 points as being relevant or important. But today you look at these 14 points and you realize that they're all critically important. And in fact, if you really take a hard look at the points here, many of them have to do with leadership, have to do with the role that leaders play in transforming the organization. But the problem with all this is what do we exactly mean by leadership? And I think this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, because when we think about historical leaders, we can think of several names that come to mind very quickly that had radically different leadership styles, and yet they were very successful. So I think when we talk about leadership, we need to understand that there are different ways to lead and different styles of leadership. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in, and hopefully this will help kind of clear up some of that confusion. The reason why this is so important, this is one of Dr. Deming's quotes, a bad system will beat a good person every time. So you can have really great people, you can have really great teams, but if you have a bad system, those people and teams are eventually going to fail. Now you notice it doesn't say a bad process, it's a bad system, which is much bigger than just a process. That includes how you relate to your customers, how you relate to your suppliers, what the culture is like, what the leadership is like within the organization. So when we talk about leadership, like I said, there's a lot of confusion. And to try to clear up that confusion, I started thinking through this spectrum from dictator on one side to collaborator on the other side. And then I basically divided that line into four components, four styles. So if you think about it, on the dictator side, style one, this would be a leader that makes decisions with little or no input. Now, believe it or not, there is a time and place for that. If the organization is truly in crisis, then you want a leader that will step forward and say, hey, I'll bear all the responsibility. I'll make the decisions. I'll get us out of this crisis. Hang with me for just a while. And, when we get out of the crisis, then we can start looking at changing, moving towards the collaborator style. Now, there's a real issue here. Obviously, if you stay in crisis mode for too long, the employees either become very complacent, because most people like being told what to do and not taking on that responsibility, at least in the short term. And they become, used to doing what the leader tells them to do. And that does not lend well to doing Lean and Six Sigma, or doing problem solving or teamwork. So a good crisis leader knows that as soon as they can get out of the crisis, they need to figure out how to migrate the organization to style two as quickly as possible. Now, style two is where the leader still is making the decisions, but they now receive significant input from other folks within the organization. And I call this the idea gathering leader. We are now asking employees at all levels to supply ideas on how to improve, how to take the organization to the next level, how to meet the customer's needs in an efficient way. Once you start getting people to thinking about ideas for how to improve, and I do think this is a critically important step, because you're introducing employees to, the idea of scientific thinking, looking into the future, thinking about ways things could improve, things could be different. And that's a real skill set that needs to be developed within the organization before you move on to style three. And style three is where you start creating teams for the first time. Now, the leader still provides a key role. It's not like you just form these teams and turn them loose. The teams still need to be focused on what are the current problems that need to be dealt with. what are the things that will help the organization overall improve. And then once the organization has some experience in working in this team environment, the ultimate goal is to get to the fully empowered teams, where the teams can now work together to achieve the strategic vision that the leader has gotten buy-in for throughout the organization. And I call this the empowerment leader. Now, I tell you, I've worked with a lot of organizations, both in manufacturing and outside of manufacturing. And it's actually pretty rare for an entire organization to make it all the way to Style 4. And it doesn't happen overnight. Usually this is a 2 to 3 to 4 year journey. But I can tell you, I have had the opportunity to work in several of these organizations that have achieved Style 4, and it's amazing. I mean, it truly is an amazing place to work. People are supportive of each other. They're working together. They have a common cause. They're improving their processes, improving the system. And I tell you, it's one of these things where you feel good every morning going to work. I know that seems foreign to a lot of folks, but it can be a reality, but it does take a lot of work. So to highlight these 4 different styles of leadership, I actually have created an activity that if you ever get a chance to come to one of my workshops, a conference, I will, usually do this live. But I wanted to just kind of explain it to you virtually, so at least you get the idea of kind of how this activity goes. It's called the Leadership Experiment. It's something I have developed over the last couple of years, and it actually supports a lot of the things we're talking about today. The way this leadership experiment activity goes, I asked for 8 volunteers to be workers and 1 volunteer to be a leader. And then I take the workers out of the room and I explain to the leader what the task is that they are being asked to do. Once I explain the task, I then bring the 8 workers back in, but you'll notice that as they are coming in, they're blindfolded. So they don't see the chairs, they don't see the ropes, they don't see anything. All they know is that they're being led to a chair and a rope is going to be placed over their right shoulder. And then at that point, once all the 8 workers are in place, the leader starts giving them directives to either pull their rope or release their rope in order to achieve a particular task. Of course, this is all being timed, so we get a sense for how long does it take to complete the task. And usually in this particular round, it takes maybe 4.5 to 5 minutes to achieve the task. Now, when that happens, what's interesting to watch is the observers of this leadership experiment will erupt in applause when the task is completed. And the workers, though, are still blindfolded. They're still sitting there, and they all have kind of a blank expression on their face. Well, at the end of that round, I then explain that we're going to do it a second time. But in the second round, I asked the leader first to describe the task that's being accomplished to all the workers. And then I asked the workers, do you understand this vision that the leader has created as far as what success looks like with this particular task? And, they'll say, yes, we do. And then I asked them to remove their blindfolds and turn their chairs 180 degrees around so they can actually see what's going on. And then I immediately start the clock. And without really much guidance from the leader, the workers, now that they can see the task and they know what success looks like, pick up the ropes, start manipulating the ropes, and will quickly start working on the task. And usually they're able to complete the task in about 15 to 17 seconds. Now remember, in the first round, it's about 4.5 to 5 minutes. but in the second round, 15 to 17 seconds. And again, the observers erupt in applause. So when I do the debrief with the whole group, the audience as well as the participants, I ask the audience, in that first round, when you broke out into applause, who were you applauding for? And after a bit of time, they'll think about it, and somebody will raise their hand and say, well, I guess we were applauding for the leader, because the leader was the one in charge. The leader was the one making all the decisions. The leader was the one giving all the directives. And then I asked the 8 workers, when you complete the task in that first round, how did you feel? And their response is very telling. It's, we didn't even know what the task was. We didn't know what the vision was. We didn't even know that we had accomplished anything. So when the audience erupted in applause, we felt nothing for that because we were not engaged. Well, then I asked the audience, what about that second round? Who were you applauding for? And they'll say, oh, we were applauding for the team, the whole team, everybody involved, the leader as well as the workers. And then I asked the workers, how did you feel at the end of round 2? And they were like, it was great. We felt a sense of accomplishment. We felt a sense of pride. And when the audience broke out in applause, we actually knew they were applauding for us. And that felt really good. And almost every time I run this experiment, someone, one of the workers, will usually ask me, hey, can we do it again? Because I think we could even beat that 15 to 17 seconds. I think we can do it even faster if we had the opportunity. So, again, I then turn to the audience and I'm 4 styles of leadership. I asked them, how does this relate to this particular chart? And clearly the first round was an example of style 1 leadership, where the leader was making all the decisions and giving all the directives. And again, they were able to accomplish the task, but it took quite a while. Then I asked, what was the second round similar to? And they'll tell me that that was the style 4, the empowerment leader. He actually provided the information to the team and then turned the team loose. And at that point, the leader becomes more of a cheerleader, a coach, giving words of encouragement. Hey, you guys are doing great. Hey, keep it up. But ultimately, the team makes the final decisions as to how to get the task done. And they're usually able to do it in a very, very short amount of time. So when you start thinking about it in those terms, throughout history, right, we know that there are different ways to encourage employees to be more productive. For decades, all throughout the 1990s, the most common form of getting more productivity out of employees was the use of fear. Fear of losing their job, fear of failure, fear of being berated by the leaders. Even goal setting has an element of fear. If you say, well, we're going to establish a goal, what does that really mean? Well, it means that if we hit the goal, something good will happen. But if we miss the goal, something bad will happen. That's the use of fear to drive a certain level of performance. And what we're finding is that that's really not a very effective way of getting productivity in the long term out of a group of employees. The second way that was pretty common is rewards or bribes. Hey, if you achieve the task, we'll give you a bonus. Now the problem with that is that the bonus might be a short-term incentive, but it loses its impact over time. So at first you might give a small bonus, but then in order to get that same level of productivity, the bonus has to be bigger, 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 and bigger. The other thing about this is that most people, when they fill out surveys for human resources, will admit that salary and bonus is not the biggest indicator of job satisfaction. Now they want to be paid a wage that is, related to their particular job, but actually things like job satisfaction and being listened to and being part of a team usually outscores pay quite a bit on these surveys. So if that doesn't work, well, then how else could we get productivity? Well, the thing that I'm sure many of you on this webinar are involved with is, how do we improve processes? How do we improve the system? And that does lead to great productivity. And of course, the more involved the employees, the more buy-in they have to those changes, to those improvements, the better the success will be with those improvements. So we'll give that a check mark. But I think that there's a fourth way to gain productivity, and it kind of was borne out with that leadership experiment I mentioned earlier. The more involved you can get the employees, the more that you can treat them like the valuable resource that they are within the organization, the more they're listened to, the more they're empowered to make decisions, the more enthusiasm that will be built. And in fact, I call that enthusiastic productivity. And organizations that are able to achieve that are pretty unstoppable. I mean, everybody within that organization is like, what can I do to help? How can I be of value? What can we do better? What can we do different? And I tell you, like I said, I've had the opportunity to work with several of these types of organizations, and it is an amazing place to work. And that's that style for leadership. Now, one other thing that kind of goes along with leadership is direction. Why are you doing Lean and Six Sigma? What do you hope to gain? And I have found over the years there's a lot of confusion around these four things: mission, vision, strategy, and values. And the reason I want to talk about this for just a moment is that these four things also relate to the four styles of leadership. First, mission. Why do we exist as an organization? What can this organization do for the customer better than anyone else? That is pretty well known in most companies, most organizations, the mission statement, if you will, that's on the business card. Why do we exist? The one that I think most companies and organizations do a very poor job of is vision. How can you describe a future that it will inspire and excite everyone in that organization? And they know the direction that you're heading, and they know what success looks like. And they come to work every day saying, wow, I want to be a part of that future. I want to be a part of that successful vision. So a little bit more about vision before I move to the next one. In the book of Proverbs, there's a quote, where there is no vision, the people perish. One time I opened up a fortune cookie right before teaching a class on vision, and it said, vision is not seeing things as they are, but as they will be. I think that's pretty profound. But my favorite quote on vision is the following. See if this makes sense. Vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. Vision with action can change the world. That was a quote by Joel Barker. And I think most organizations are stuck in this second one. Action without vision just passes the time. How do we get through the month? How do we get through the quarter? How do we get through the year without a clear understanding of where we're headed? And it's just like you're treading water. And that's not very exciting. Now, what would a good vision look like? I tell you, I'm sure most of you know the vision that John F. Kennedy gave in the 1960s. You probably know it by heart. But basically the vision went, by the end of the decade, we want to put a man on the moon. That was the vision. And if you think about all the things that happened in the 1960s to make that a reality, is pretty amazing. And in fact, that basically led to the entire aerospace industry that we know of today. So that one vision changed the world. So that's what we're talking about here. The next part of this is strategy. Again, if you have a vision without action, that's just a dream. Well, the strategy is what actions do you need to help make that vision a reality. And then finally, values. How would you describe in concrete terms what your culture is like? And what evidence is there that those descriptions are real? Because sometimes we talk about what we would like the culture to be, but if there's no evidence that those things are real, then that just leads to a lot of frustration. So there's actually a activity I describe in my book. I list out about, probably almost 4 dozen different values. And the activity is basically you take that list of values, put one on an index card each. So you end up with about 40 or so index cards. And then you pull your leadership team together and show them the cards, explain the different values, and then ask them to rank them from the most important value for that organization all the way down to the least important value for the organization. I tell you, it's an amazing activity, and it can be very frustrating because, again, some of the values, you start looking at them and saying, well, this is really, really important, but it's not quite as important as this other value. So trying to put them in a ranking order is very difficult, but it leads to some really great in-depth discussion after completing the activity. Now, why are these 4 things important? Like I said, they do go along with the 4 leadership styles. If you think about it, when you're in style 1, the only thing the organization really needs to understand is the mission, because the leader's making all the decisions. So the mission is really the only thing the whole organization needs to know and buy into. But in order to move to style 2, that's where you need that vision, because when you're asking others for their input, how do they know what kind of input to provide if they don't know where the organization is going? Too many times I've seen organizations ask their employees for ideas for improvement, and they'll end up coming up with 100 ideas. But then how do you sort those ideas? How do you prioritize them if you don't know what the vision is, if you don't know where you're heading? And then in order to move to style 3, you really need to know what the strategy is, because each of the teams needs to be a part of that strategy. And if you're not careful, if you don't have that strategy, then the teams don't know what to work on. And I've actually, visited some organizations where, the teams didn't know what to work on, and so they were just sitting in the room talking about nothing, or looking at things like, what kind of plants should we put into the cafeteria? Or what color balloon should we use for birthday celebrations? So if they're not part of the strategy, if they don't understand what the strategy is, they don't know what to work on. So strategy is key for style 3. And then in order to get to style 4 is you need to have a clear understanding throughout the whole organization. What are the key values that the organization holds dear? Things like teamwork, trust, employee involvement, collaboration, those kinds of things become critically important for style 4 to be successful. Now, an actual result of a company that got to style 4, this was a business within Ingersoll Rand that I worked for a few years. When we started down this journey, this particular business, you can see, makes the exit devices that goes there on the door. Great business. But when we started down this journey, if you ordered one of these exit devices, it would take 8 to 12 weeks for you to receive that device. And we only hit that time window 70% of the time, which meant 30% of the time it exceeded 12 weeks. And then when the customer opened the box, 20% of the time there was something missing or the device was wrong. Now, of course, what did they have to do? They had to send that device back. and wait another 8 to 12 weeks to get their replacement. Now that sounds really bad, but our competition was no better. The whole industry kind of fit into this profile. Now we batched a lot of things. We had over 10,000 different exit devices we could produce at any one time, but since we batched everything, we could only do 10 of those models a day at most. But look at this last one. This one's my favorite stats. We were producing 1,300 of these exit devices, plus or minus 1,000 every day. So, what does that tell you about our system? It was very broken. And there were some days we would come in and we would barely get 300 out the door. And the very next day we would get 2,000 out the door. And we would kind of think, well, one day we were bad luck. The next day we had good luck. One of the quotes in my book is that good leaders don't believe in good or bad luck, only good or bad processes. And in fact, 3 years later, this particular organization did achieve Style 4 leadership. In fact, the person who was overseeing this entire division was one of my proofreaders for my book. So 3 years later, if you ordered one of these exit devices, we guaranteed 1 to 2 day delivery. And that wasn't from inventory. We actually built it and shipped it in 2 days or less. We were able to do that 99% of the time. When the customer opened up the box, there was less than a 0.01% chance that something would be wrong, and we had data to support that. We had reduced our batch sizes considerably and gone to single-minute exchange of die concept throughout the plant. So we were able to do over 250 models a day. But then look at this last one. And again, we had data to support this. We were producing 2,300 of these exit devices a day, plus or minus 1. It didn't matter if it was Monday or Friday, beginning of the week, beginning of the month, end of the month, 2,300 plus or minus 1 every day. So that gives you a sense for the stability of this process. Now, the first day that we hit 100% in all these metrics, we had these big scoreboards all throughout the plant. It's one of those days I'll always remember in my career. We hit 100% at the end of the day, and the entire plant erupted in spontaneous applause and cheers. That goes to show how engaged the employees were, how much vested they were in the success of this particular organization. Because like I said, we had achieved that Style 4 leadership. Now, this doesn't just apply in manufacturing. Another organization, this was a call center. When you called into this call center, the average on hold time was 28 minutes. Now, that's average. Some people were on hold for close to an hour. We did the same thing, and we were able to get the organization to that Style 4 leadership side. And they only needed about a year, but a year later, they were down to 25 seconds average hold time. Same number of calls, same number of call takers, and they would tell you that their jobs were significantly easier because the system had been improved from beginning to end. One last thing before we open it for questions, just to kind of wrap this up. Once you've identified these 4 leadership styles, it starts to become very apparent where the leaders are on this spectrum and where the organization is on this spectrum. And both of those are critically important, because think about it. If you hired a Style 4 leader and the organization was used to a Style 1 leader, they're wanting the leader to tell them what to do and when to do it and how to do it. And the Style 4 leader saying, I want you to be empowered. Well, they're not ready for that. And one of two things is going to happen. Either the leader's going to get frustrated and eventually resign, or the workers are going to get the leader fired because they're not ready for a Style 4 leader. The opposite is also true. Imagine if you hired a Style 1 leader, but the organization had worked their way up to Style 3. They're already doing teams, and this new leader wants to tell them what to do and how to do it. Again, that's going to lead to great frustration. So it's important as you're on this journey to make sure that your leaders that you're hiring match where the organization is and has the capability to take them to the next level. So that's the end of my presentation. Again, these slides will be made available to folks. So what kind of questions can we discuss in the last 15 minutes here?
So at this point in time, if you guys have a question for John that you would like him to answer during this time, I'd encourage you to go to the bottom of your screen where it has the Q&A and type in a question that you have so that we can answer that for you. I think, John, you talked about a lot of really terrific and wonderful insights today. So how does a leadership team create a proper vision, and why is that such an important step towards moving the organization away from style one to a style one leadership?
All right, great question. First of all, this is one of the key roles of the leadership team, is to work together to craft the beginning of the vision. But eventually they are going to need to get buy-in from the entire organization. So when they present this to the workers, they'll get feedback on that vision that will need to help shape it and continue to mold it. You know, the way I like to put it is the analogy of the potter's wheel and clay. You know, the first vision might start to look a little bit like a vase. But the workers might, as they start to buy into the vision, might, you know, say you need to slap a handle on it, and now it becomes a pitcher. So now the leadership team needs to get input from all sources, from their customers, from their suppliers, from other industry leaders. And in fact, as you're moving down this progression, instead of putting fires out all the time like they might at style one, they really need to spend the bulk of their time gathering this information in order to craft this vision. I think it's one of the most critical jobs that they will have as a leadership team. Now, again, why is that so important? Because if you don't know where you're going, how do you know what success looks like? How do people know what ideas to contribute? You know, how do they know when they've won the game? You know, how do they know when they've completed the task, like I mentioned in the leadership experiment? And how do they know when to celebrate? So, and the vision, you know, typically when I work with organizations, it's usually a 2 to 3 year, and you'll need to update that from time to time. You know, it's not a static thing. It's not in concrete. You will need to adjust it as you go along.
Great. We have another couple questions, and I apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but Ray, what should the CEO do when others in leadership positions do not change and adopt progressive ways of leading, even after repeated attempts to coach/move on? Oftentimes the pressure to mold the culture a certain way comes about because the executive team faces pressures from investors or venture capital. How do you deal with that? So multiple questions there, John, if you could take that on.
Well, first of all, I think most leaders don't understand these 4 styles. So if I'm in style 1 and have been for a long time, and I'm told that we've got to go to style 4, I'm going to push back on that and resist it horribly, because that's too great of a leap. You know, it's just too foreign to what I'm used to. And I may not even know what style 4 means or what it looks like. You know, what does empowerment look? You know, what does that even mean? So, so again, my experience is that if you don't know what leadership style is needed to be successful in a Lean and Six Sigma culture, you're just going to keep doing what you've always done. So by breaking this up into steps, now it becomes a little more palatable, right? Hey, I can ask people for their input. I can ask people for their ideas and not be threatened as the leader. I can do that. Oh, wow, that was pretty successful. We got some really good ideas. Man, you know, my employees are really top-notch people. you know, why don't we start putting them into some teams and let's see what they can accomplish as a team. And then before you know it, you're starting to build that trust on both sides. And you look back 2 or 3 years later and saying, wow, we've really come a long way, both as the leader and as the organization. Now, if you do have a CEO or really any leader that has responsibility and authority that just refuses to change, you're in trouble. I mean, you know, it's simple as that. You can try to coach them. You can, you know, explain the different styles. But I really think over time, the way this is going to change for all industries, as more and more people realize, you know, the importance of leadership and the different styles of leader, and as that's taught more and more in MBA school, as that's understood more and more by board of directors, they're going to start hiring people that meet these definitions and understand why that's critically important. So in some cases, you may just have to wait it out until a new CEO comes on board, and hopefully the board of directors will, you know, hire the right person. Now, I do think that there is a fundamental change happening. You know, a few months ago, 150 CEOs put out the directive that they were going to shift away from quarterly profit and shareholder value and focus more on employees, customers, you know, systems, that sort of thing. So at least they're recognizing the need. But again, it'd be interesting to poll those 150 CEOs to know if they have any idea what they've signed up for. You know, it's one thing to say that they want to make that shift. It's a whole nother thing to put it into practice.
Great. I see a lot of different questions coming in about being in different phases or steps in, you know, whether they're working with a 1 or a 4. And I know you talked about some of those steps that they can take, but what would be just a simple step forward? Is it really just, hey, let's start engaging with the team, let's creating teams, just having that conversation? Is that meaningful enough where leaders will see some impact and results from their team?
Yeah, you know, actually, I think the first step is recognizing the 4 styles and understanding what that means. Because again, like I said, my experience is when I sit down with a CEO for the first time and try to kind of give them a sense for what Lean and Six Sigma are, their first question usually is, well, what do you need from me? And I'll say, well, you know, you could do this and this and this. And they're like, oh, wait, are you saying I'm going to have to change? I'm like, well, maybe. Yeah, probably. In fact, yes, you will. Well, I'm not sure about that. So first is recognizing that these 4 styles exist and are needed. One other point on the 4 styles, since we're talking about that, keep in mind that this can be fluid. You could have an organization where you get everybody up to style 3, and then a crisis hits, something really awful happens to the organization. And at that point, the leader will have to shift back to style 1 for a period of time. Now, what'll be great is they can explain that to the organization. Hey, we're in this crisis. We've gotten all the way up to style 3. That's terrific. But because of the crisis, we're going to have to go back to style 1 for a period of time. Now, my goal, my objective is to get us back to style 3 as quickly as possible. And usually when you explain it like that, most employees will say, yeah, okay, I get it. I understand. We're in crisis mode, but we're going to get out, as soon as we can.
Right.
Now, having
that one voice momentarily, right? Yeah,
exactly right. And that actually, happens in the narrative that I lay out in the book. That they're moving great, and then all of a sudden a crisis hits, and they have to go back to style 1 for a period of time. And kind of what does that look like? How does that feel? But yeah, so understanding the 4 styles is critically important. And then if you're in style 1, the best way to get to style 2 is to start just simply asking for ideas from the employees and working on that vision statement. Critically important. Okay.
Great. We have before we answer a couple more, one is where can folks get your book? And then two, as you answer that, I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll that I talked about at the top of the session. Again, there's just, I think, 3 or 4 very easy questions to help us gauge, was this all worth it? Is John really that good? No, I'm just kidding. We know, John, I've been taking so many notes here, tweeting about it live. So if you see that, follow our Twitter handle. I'll include that in the email as well as John's. Really good stuff there. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll right now. And go ahead and just, like I said, it's 3 questions. Please answer while you tell us, John, where we can get your book.
Yeah, actually, it's available online at any major outlet. So Amazon.com, both in Kindle format and hardbound, BarnesandNobles.com, even Walmart.com. Yeah, and I tell you just a closing comment on that, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to spend time with everyone. It's interesting though, just not too long ago, I had a COO of a pretty good sized company read my book. And it was interesting, his comment to me afterwards. He said, John, he said, I read your book, and as I'm reading it, I'm thinking to myself, there's no way anyone could be as awful as Frank Smith, the villain. And then he said that for the next 2 weeks after he read the book, all he could see around him were Frank Smiths. And then he realized that he was acting like Frank Smith. And that was a huge aha moment for him, that, oh my goodness, we're not as good as we think we are. And that actually led to him buying books for his whole leadership team. They actually went through the book chapter by chapter as a leadership team. And then these were plant manager level folks. And then they ended up buying the book for their supervisors, for their leaders within each of the plants. So it really does have the possibility of changing the way people think. So hopefully people will find that same inspiration.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you 90%, 97% of those who took the poll indicated that this was very, very helpful. So thank you, John, for sharing your expertise. It's been, I can't believe that this 1 hour is almost past. So very, very engaging and helpful. Thank you very much. Sorry, April, go ahead.
That's okay, John. So there's a question that came up in the chat. What would be a simple way a new leader might assess his or her current team of workers to determine their level of readiness for one of those 4 styles of leadership?
Yeah, and again, see, that's critically important because it's the combination of both the leader and the organization. So again, if I were a new leader in a new organization, the first thing I would do is start having one-on-one meetings with the employees or group meetings with the employees and ask them, what have you done so far in the areas of Lean and Six Sigma? How involved and engaged have you been? How much training has been provided up till now? And if they look at you like you're, speaking a foreign language, then you know that they have been stuck in style 1 for a long time. And you're going to have to start with the basics, basic training, basic engagement, then eventually getting to the point where you can start asking for their ideas. So yeah, it's really just a matter of sitting down with employees at all levels. This isn't just your direct reports. This would be employees at all levels, and talking to them and asking them, what do you feel comfortable with? How much experience have you had working as a team? How much training have you had? And that'll give you a good assessment as to where you need to start from.
John, I don't know if this is an easy question or hard, but if you had to name one leader that you really admire, who would that be? Not the opposite. We know there's a lot of those that you don't admire. I'm sure we could all come up with several names, but who's that one person that you kind of look as the North Star of, hey, this is who we should aspire to be like?
Yeah, the problem is most people won't know this person.
Maybe you could just describe them I don't know.
Yeah, and actually it would be the leader of that exit device business that I was mentioning, who also helped proofread the book, and he's mentioned in the acknowledgments. And terrific guy. You know, and again, when we started down this journey, he had a much different perception of what good leadership looks like. But over those 3 years, he became a bigger and bigger believer, and then went on to you know, be CEO of a couple of other companies and take that knowledge with him. And he's been extremely successful, and now he's retired. Yeah, you know, it's funny though, you know, he's had many, many years of experience. And when we got to the chapter on the book about management by objectives, and how that is something that needs to change because it drives fear, he was, boy, he that was a tough pill for him to swallow, because he's like, I've been using management by objectives my whole career, and now you're telling me that's wrong. And it's like, yeah, unfortunately. But it was great because again, he was a great person to bounce those kinds of discussions and ideas off of, and he was definitely the best person I've ever worked with and worked for.
Well, thank you, John, so much. I know it's we're a minute past here, at least that's what it shows on my computer. A few things, again, you can take a look at that poll, which I have live. One assessment tool that we offer through Missouri Enterprise, again, at zero cost, is our Business Excellence Assessment. As John was saying, we all get stuck in our day-to-day operations or day-to-day just going through the flow, going through the motions, without truly being able to see some of the pain points and the overall big picture. And oftentimes, as again, April and John will attest to, it can be poor leadership, lack of vision or mission. Things are not rowing in the same direction. So our Business Excellence Assessment tool is a holistic approach to turning over every stone to find opportunity to give manufacturers the insight they need to move forward and see things from a different lens. So I'll make sure I include that Business Excellence Assessment. In addition to that, our last 2 webinars for the July webinar series take place next week. I will include that in the email. And of course, yes, this is being recorded, and I'll send you a recording of that as well as John's slides. So next Monday, we have millennials and working with them in the COVID era. That will be next Monday at 1 p.m. And that is, of course, at no cost, followed by 3D printing and how that can help you as a manufacturer save time and money. It's now an affordable tool, not just the big guys are using it, but small manufacturers throughout the state of Missouri are using this tool to grow. So again, that's next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Again, thank you so much, John. This has been a treasure. We really appreciate it. Wonderful results. And I think all the comments really show that this is something that's very important, not only to businesses alike, but manufacturers in general, and looking at it as a way to grow and thrive. So thank you so much. And April, thank you.